And my name is Ian McLean, and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self, receive the same respect and opportunity, regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you'll join us in fostering a positive environment here today to ensure a safe and welcoming space for all. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors of today's event. As with all Chamber events and programs, it wouldn't happen without the support of our corporate and business thanking these incredible sponsors. I'd like to recognize some of our community leaders in attendance with us here today. Regional Councillor and Mayor of North Dumfries, Sue Foxton. Mayor Barry Urbanek is not here, but on his way in between one of the many things he does in a day, so we appreciate him joining us today. Justin McFadden, who represents the council and CAO. Where's Justin? He's somewhere here. There he is, from the City of Waterloo. And we have a couple of board members here. We have an incredible volunteer board that support the work that the Chamber and my team do. Roberto Villamar is here. I see, there he is at the back. And Chloe Hamilton from Warm Embrace. So thank you for joining us today. I'd also now like to take the opportunity to invite Jet LaFantasy. Got it. That's my contribution to French. Regional Manager with TD Indigenous Banking to the stage to say a few words. Jet.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, sharing this space with us today. First, I'd like to acknowledge any elders and Indigenous leadership that are here in the room with us today. Thank you. Thank you for joining. My name is Jet. I'm 6 feet tall, brown hair, medium build. As many of you may know, Indigenous peoples have respected women for their spiritual and mental strength for a long time. In fact, many First Nations were matrilineal for a long period of their history, meaning that descent, wealth, inheritance, and knowledge was passed down through women, through the women of the community. Today, it's of equal importance to have women's voices in the conversation in business and in our commerce. And that's why I'm so grateful for the opportunity to listen to an engaging conversation with Tabatha today. TD Bank is a proud supporter of all of our clients, and our organization has dedicated teams designed to provide specialized, personalized advice to various groups. TD Women in Enterprise, supporting women in business and women-led organizations, like my colleague Sarah Lane leads, as well as TD Indigenous Banking, supporting Indigenous peoples across the country, are two examples of how TD focuses on these peoples and delivering everything that the bank has to offer. We do this by delivering dedicated programs and resources to our clients. For the Indigenous Banking Group, some of these include TD Scholarship for Indigenous Peoples, the TD First Nation Home Loan Program, our growing on-reserve branch network, as well as customized financing solutions for all individuals. TD's here to support you, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's an honor and privilege to be supporting this event today, and don't let me hold up the show any longer.
Well, thank you, Jet. And today's discussion is an important one for the community as a whole, but certainly for the business community. And I have the pleasure of formally introducing today's speakers. Tabatha Bull, a proud member of Nipissing First Nation, holds the distinction of being named CEO of the Year for 2022 by the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. Was recognized as one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women in 2023 and named as a top 100 lobbyist in Canada 4 years in a row. As the President and CEO of the CCAB, she is dedicated to rebuilding and strengthening the path towards reconciliation and fostering a prosperous Indigenous economy for the benefit of all Canadians. With a background in electrical engineering, Tabatha is committed to promoting Indigenous inclusion and diversity in Canada's energy sector. In her role at CCAB, Tabatha serves the Indigenous community by supporting the Indigenous economy and sits on various boards including Dexterra Group, Wigwarren Inc., the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and Catalyst CEO Advisory Board in Canada, among others. Tabatha's dedication to diversity extends to her efforts in removing systematic barriers to enhance opportunities for Indigenous businesses and women across all industry sectors. And moderating today's conversation is my dear friend, Michelle Eaton. She is now the Senior VP of Corporate Affairs with OLG. The Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. Michelle works positioned to position OLG as a leader in responsible gaming, entertainment through strategic stakeholder management, government relations, community engagement, sustainability, and social responsibility, as well as communications. Prior to joining OLG in March of 2024, Michelle was Vice President of Public Affairs at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, where I got to know her well, where she led an exceptional expansion of the organization's impact and reach throughout the province. She was involved in developing and implementing strategic and risk management plans that led to material growth in organizational revenues over her tenure, but also strengthened the network of local chambers as well. She had agreed to do this, to moderate this session before she left the OCC, and as only Michelle can, she has kept her promise and has joined us even though she's in her new role, so I'm eternally grateful for that. Over her career, Michelle has worked in public and private and not-for-profit sectors, helping to shape communications and public affairs strategies within the key roles at organizations such as Rothmans and Benson & Hedges, Manulife, and the federal government. Please join me in welcoming Tabatha and Michelle to the stage. Also, let me extend an invitation to Destiny Moser of Foodzen. She's a member of our Chamber of Commerce and a member of the Indigenous community to the stage to help welcome Tabatha to our stage today. Destiny. Thank you, Destiny, for welcoming Tabatha to the stage. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Ian, and big thanks to you and your team for putting on today's event. It's an important discussion, but also for all the incredible work you do to support businesses in the community, but the greater prosperity of the region. So it's important work, and let's give them a round of applause, folks. And Tabatha, I'm so excited to see you. And first of all, thank you for all that you do to support Indigenous businesses, Indigenous communities, and the Indigenous economy. But for folks in this room, I guess you kind of already summarized it, but Tabatha's on the Ontario Chamber of Commerce board. I worked at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce for 6 years up until a couple months ago, so I'm very new in my new role. But it was amazing because we, beyond that, we partnered, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce partnered with the CCAB on an economic reconciliation project, which is ongoing. Now, it first started every year, the Chamber does the Ontario Economic Report, where we pulse businesses on various questions and benchmark from year to year. And one of the questions we had added in the last few years was asking businesses about their their efforts towards economic reconciliation. And what we found out was a lot of businesses wanted to start the journey, but didn't really know how to start or meaningfully start. So we struck an advisory council, and then we released, I think it was last year, they released a document that provided some guidance to business. This is the first steps of a long journey, but it's just so nice to reconnect and admire your leadership. And then just fast forward to today, I'm at OLG. I'm proud to champion Indigenous relations, and as an organization, we're committed to making meaningful and everlasting impact, and that takes ongoing steps and efforts. So really looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Miigwech.
Yeah. So we have a lot to cover, so let's dive in. So Tabatha, how about you just start with telling the folks in the crowd a little bit about CCAB?
Sure. Well, first, Ani, Tabatha Indigenous Cost, Nipissing Indigenous Miigwech for having me. So I've just introduced myself in Anishinaabe which is our traditional language in Nipissing. Thank you for the land acknowledgement, and thank you for the tobacco. I don't know where there. Thank you, Miigwech. So, we're actually coming up on our 40th anniversary at CCAB, and I've just finished reviewing our magazine, which is turning into an encyclopedia that really looks back at the history of our organization. And it's been incredible just to really review and think back about the history and all of those who came before me and before us at our organization. So we were established 40 years ago. The story goes that Murray Koffler, who was the founder of Shoppers Drug Mart, was and also involved in the hotel business, was in Calgary looking at a new potential location for a hotel, and there was a homeless Indigenous family living in this abandoned site. And not long after that, he went into one of the Shopper Drug Mart stores, and there was an Indigenous man who was being wrongly accused of theft. So he came back to Toronto and met with a number of his friends on Bay Street, and also Indigenous leaders. He had a farm near St. Catharines, which is called Joker's Hill. So the first meeting on Joker's Hill really was the start of what CCAB is. And there were individuals there, Murray Koffler, Paul Martin, Chief Wilton Littlechild, Ron Jameson. So a number of Indigenous leaders and business leaders that really had a conversation about what they could be doing and what they should be doing to help support Indigenous business and communities and Indigenous people in business. This is long before the TRC, long before TRC 92. So really forethought happening in that space. So they struck, which was called at that time the Canadian Council for Native Business. And a lot of the work that they were doing was around internships with First Nation and Métis and Inuit people to work in spaces in corporate Canada and get some of that experience, just understanding more what business was. Programming around entrepreneurship, and also really about building that bridge between non-Indigenous and Indigenous business. And that's still our mission and our mandate today, 40 years later. Our work, of course, is a little bit different. When we look back at some of those initial interns that were part of that program, and this has also been part of us really looking back and learning our own history. Drew Hayden Taylor, who many of you would be familiar with, who's a playwright and also has been involved in CBC. He had an internship at CBC as one of those first interns. And he really recognizes, I'm giving away all the stories in the magazine, but he really recognizes that opportunity for him to work at CBC as an intern and how that just got him into radio, but then also into TV, and now he's a well-known playwright. Previous National Chief Perry Bellegarde was also an intern at the time. Now he's a successful lawyer and the chairman of First Nation Bank of Canada. It's really incredible to look back and think just how those internships made such a big difference. Today we are almost 60 staff. We have a large portion of our team that is research, and all of the research that we do informs all of the programming that we do, as you know, and it's our research team that's working really closely with Ontario Chamber of Commerce. So our research team has worked with Indigenous businesses, understanding what the barriers are, which I know we'll talk a little bit about, and that has informed a lot of the programming that we do. We are a membership organization, a not-for-profit and a registered charity. Currently we have 2,500 members, and that's a exponential growth that we've seen. So I joined CCAB in 2018. We had 700 members then. And when I became CEO in 2020, we were about 1,100. So we've more than doubled in 4 years, and a lot of our members are here in the room. It's been really incredible to see that growth, both in Indigenous business and non-Indigenous business that's coming and wanting to work and be part of the work that we're doing, and we're so thankful for that. So a couple of our programs, in addition to our research, our events, and really celebrating success of Indigenous business leaders and also of partners who have really proven their work as advocates for Indigenous businesses as well. We have 5 awards a year. And then we also have, it's called Tools for Indigenous Business. So a number of different tools and webinars. Maybe it's about helping build a business plan or business insurance or templates around insurance risk. And a lot of those are supported by our members. And then more recently, over the last 10 years, we've been really focused on procurement. So we have a program called Supply Change. And this was what we heard from our members, that they wanted to get into the supply chains of corporate Canada and government. So we have a marketplace that has currently almost 1,400 certified Indigenous businesses within it, and about close to 200 organizations who have made a commitment to purchase from Indigenous business. And we've seen that really grow in the last number of years. And then alongside of that is where the lobbying comes in. And that's really work that's ramped up since 2020. And as you would know from OCC, and as you know, this chamber would know as well, when the pandemic hit and business supports were being rolled out by government.
Doesn't it feel like it was 20 years ago?
That's like
yesterday and 20 years ago. I'm like, oh, Lord.
So we told the team that I was going to be the new CEO on March 13th, 2020. We've never gone back to normal. The interview I had early March where it was like, what's your first 90 days, was definitely not my first 90 days. I think it was the third Sunday, maybe. Remember, Rosemary Barton had a press conference every day after Trudeau stood outside of his cottage. And it was a Saturday, and I was like, today I'm not going to work. I went downstairs and made a coffee, and I got back with my book, and I got this text message that Rosemary Barton wants you to be on after the press conference. I was like, on TV? It was in 30 minutes. I've never showered and done my hair and makeup so fast in my life. And I will tell you, I've done a lot of media since then, but that was definitely the biggest and one of the first ones. And my kids
30 minutes prep.
Yeah, 30 minutes prep. I was like just my voice or actually my face. But that man, and I'm oversharing, but
I'm here for it. I'm an oversharer too, so I'm
sweat
encourage
marks
it.
in the pits of my blouse after that interview, where it was one of the most nerve-wracking things. And yeah, 3 weeks into the job. So so all that to say that advocacy work that we really started putting a big focus on came out of necessity, because a lot of the business programs and business supports that were initially developed and put out by the federal government, First Nation businesses couldn't access for various reasons, not intentional reasons, but some of them, like where you report your payroll. If you are on a First Nation and you have all First Nation employees, you don't report it in the taxable section of your income statement. And that was what the banks were supposed to be asking for. So we had to work with the government to get that changed. Also, at that time, you had to have a relationship with one of the traditional 5 banks in order to access the business accounts, and only 30% of Indigenous business at that time had a relationship with a bank. So that announcement that was made that day outside of the cottage and the subsequent interview with Rosemary was about additional funding that was put out for Indigenous businesses. And all of that advocacy work is really supported through our research team as well. And since then, we've also got some really big wins on procurement with the federal government committing to a minimum of 5% spend from Indigenous businesses, and for them to actually be reporting on what their spend is, which is, as we all know, if you're not committed to reporting publicly, then progress isn't going to happen as fast. So advocacy has been a big portion of our work, and procurement we continue to push for. And then our other program, and we'll get to the second question, is a program called Progressive Aboriginal Relations, which we've had for over 20 years. And that program is to help support organizations in their work with Indigenous businesses and communities. And it's really a roadmap that helps an organization go through the process of looking at how they're currently supporting Indigenous business and communities, employees, and what they can potentially do, and then set targets. And then they have 3 years to go through the process of getting to action. And then we have a group of Indigenous business leaders that go in and verify that the company is meeting those commitments that they've set out. And then that goes to a jury of Indigenous business leaders, independent of CCAB, which is very important because many of these people are our members and sponsors, and we really need to ensure that that's an independent process. And they award a certification level. So we currently have 250 organizations in Canada in that program, and about 60 have been certified. So it's kind of like a B Corp certification, except for Indigenous relations and economic partnerships.
That's awesome. And it's so cool to hear about the growth journey and whatnot. Like your leadership at the organization has just been incredible. So it's been an honor to work with your team. And I think, some of the things we've talked to your team about is the importance of non-Indigenous companies stepping up and taking leadership and taking action. So I think for the folks in this room, probably be great if you could speak a little bit to guidance to business owners across this region on how they can contribute to reconciliation. Because again, that goes back to that question from the Ontario Economic Report, the survey that goes out to inform it. People just don't know where to start or how to take meaningful steps.
Yeah, and I think too, that's understandable. I think there's a really great quote from Brené Brown in her book Dare to Lead that talks about we're so afraid of like saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing or asking the wrong question that we might offend somebody that we just don't make any movement at all, and that really is just delaying us from making progress. So so the framework and the guidebook that we're working on with OCC, and we did a similar guidebook with ISED in federal government, is really just to help support organizations and like what could be our first step. And sometimes that's also like, a community or an organization that's newly working with First Nation communities as well. Like, how do I know how I should pronounce the name, or who do I call, or just some
Sometimes
of those,
you just need to ask.
That's
too.
right. Yeah.
Like,
Bob Joseph, who wrote the book 21 Things You Don't Know About the Indian Act, which is an incredible read. He does some training, and he'll say like, before you go to a community, just call the band office and listen to how they say the name of the community so you actually know how to properly pronounce the name of the community before you go there. But it's a simple thing to do for, he has another book called Indigenous Relations that has a lot of really good tips that way. But I would say for, any business owner, procurement is an incredible step. And it's not something that's, adding to your budget line, for one. So there are so many Indigenous businesses that can be part of a supply chain in Ontario and Canada. And it's not about spending more money. It's about just looking at where you're spending your money and moving it to a place that's going to make an impact on the Indigenous economy. And sometimes we get you hear people say, well, I don't think that we have anything that Indigenous business can supply to us. And we are quick to say, like, do you drink coffee? Do you have a graphic designer? Like, marketing and communications, event facilitation. There are Indigenous businesses in every sector and every size. And even if it's like two, quick things that you're doing, it's going to make an impact. So procurement for sure would be, look at where you're really spending your money. And then I think it's also about like setting an example and showing that leadership so that other people aren't as afraid to ask the same question. And so, once you do procure from a business, like share that's, this is the corporate gift that we bought and it's from this Indigenous business, and just helping promote and keep that conversation going. And then the other thing I would say is networking. I know we were going to talk about, barriers, but we talk often about the barrier of capital and access to capital for Indigenous businesses. And, we see that in not just an Indigenous business or First Nation businesses that's on reserve and doesn't have the collateral to be able to get access to capital, but also, Indigenous people are still seen as a higher risk by some people, and there's still a bias that exists. So that access to capital, financial capital, is so important, but also the access to social capital. So if we think about the people in this room, if everyone in this room invited an Indigenous business to come today and join them for lunch, that access to this network of people for an Indigenous entrepreneur is something that will have an incredible impact. And maybe it's about like meeting someone in Indigenous banking, or maybe it's about meeting someone at Enbridge that could potentially like purchase from them. It's that social capital also that is a huge barrier. And I say this often about my kids. So I have a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old, and we live in Toronto. They play hockey on teams where the dad on the team is like the COO at Amex. Like, their access to the networks is so much different than their cousins.
Need to join
at
their
home.
teams, apparently.
It's funny even because my dad will come watch and I'll be like, oh, this is my friend Rob or whoever. No, I've just named him, but
Thank you, Rob.
yeah. And
watching.
they'll walk away and they'll be like, who's that? And I'll say like wherever. And even my dad is, it's not, my dad didn't grow up in circles like that where there was that access. So if my kids ever want to start a business, they have all of these people to go to in their circle that would help them along the way. And we need to bring that type of social capital to Indigenous entrepreneurs. And that's a very small cost, no item that any business in KW could help support.
Yeah, that sounds great, and it's a long term, it's a journey, it's a long term commitment. So, I think even seeking guidance to be Indigenous formed is a good first step for a lot of organizations too.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it sounds like you've planned Ian's next networking event through the chamber. So thank you, Ian, for taking. Yeah, I'm watching you. Okay, perfect. So let's shift a little bit now. Also, OLG is a very proud member of the CCAB.
Yes,
and
OLG is a very proud member.
And they're actually, just to plug the organization, because there is incredible resources there. So I encourage you to check it out at ccab.ca. Sorry?
.com.
.com. So, see you taking notes on that too. Thank you, Ian. So post-secondary education, it's a major sector in our local economy, and I just want to get some of your thoughts about how universities and colleges advance economic equality and more opportunities for Indigenous employers and employees. What types of on-campus supports do you think would be most critical for students?
Yeah, so I'll say, and University of Waterloo is here, which my sister is very involved in, and I'm a Waterloo grad. I think the last time I was in this room was my grad party.
That.
And it's been really amazing to see the progress that's happening in academia to support Indigenous students. And my son goes to Queen's, and they have a really great support for Indigenous students there at Queen's, and Waterloo has the same. I think from my own experience of watching my son, we can provide all the experiences that we want. It's how do we get the students to actually access them, and that's really hard, I think, too, particularly for students in first year. But I think we got to keep providing those types of programming, and so some of those examples. Well, firstly, the entrance into university. We do see a number of programming that will allow for a lower access to entry, both from a grade perspective, or perhaps it's from an experience perspective, if that's part of the requirements. And I think that is really, really important. Even now, the grades to get into university in some programs are incredibly anxiety-inducing for
times have changed since I went.
It's something, and you really do see that. Oftentimes, it's also those kids who maybe don't have to have a job or have better access to broadband or education schooling. Especially when we think back to COVID, when kids in community were having to try to learn without high-speed internet, but. so that first it's that access to entry, which I think is really important. But the other piece I think is how are we reaching kids in elementary school? Because by the time you get to grade 10, you're having to choose the courses that are going to determine what you want to be when you grow up. And by the time we get to when we're really getting in touch with those kids in post-secondary, we're too late, really. So it's about
Still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, to be honest. I'm kind of like, that's a journey as
I
well.
obviously thought I did, and I'm not doing that anymore. But I think we need to find ways to be like speaking to kids when they're younger about that opportunity, or even just about like what post-secondary schools are like and what are these other opportunities. And I think I would also go back to that social capital about students. Even when we think about grade 9, take your kid to work day. So if we think about students and a lot of Indigenous students, I mean, I'm an engineer, there aren't a lot of Indigenous engineers. So how are Indigenous students going to be able to go to take your work day in an engineering setting if their parent or their family aren't in that program? So it's something that we're talking about at CCAB. Is there a way that we can start some type of program that's like take your kid to work day in grade 9 where Indigenous students can go to places where they're really interested in versus like having to go with their parent or auntie or uncle? And it's really about that exposure. And then I think the actual, like, how do we find supports for students when they're in that first year? And we were talking about this with my friends at Waterloo. It's a really hard first year. And I think that's the case for everybody, not just Indigenous students. Like, I was on a panel last week with this gentleman from McGill, and he was saying that this analogy that the world was like built for giraffes. And if the world was all built for giraffes and we've built schools and systems around these like excellent giraffes, and then we have this cohort of children that went through COVID, and what we actually have are dolphins. And we have built the world for giraffes, but we have all of these dolphins. It doesn't mean that dolphins can't be amazing and they're not excellent dolphins, but we haven't built the world for them. It's an overused analogy as we continue to go into the conversation, but I mean, for me, it really tweaked to say, like, how are we also like setting the table differently to really ensure that we're supporting a diverse thinking model.
Yeah, and I can't remember which report it was, but at the chamber, like looking at data that earlier interventions with children, because they're starting to form their ideas of what they want to do around like kind of grade 3, grade 4, whether we're aware of it or not. So more exposure to different types of businesses. So if there's labor market demand for more engineers, then they like finding kind of matchmaking opportunities, if you will, between elementary or post-secondary education, so that they can get that exposure and see what it looks like. Because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
When you're growing up. And then I grew up in rural southwestern Ontario, near Tillsonburg. So there were so many parts of like business that I was a question mark. What is that like?
Yeah.
My parents still don't know what I do
Yeah.
to this day.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think also I don't know if Waterloo has this, but Queens has had a program where Indigenous students could come to campus a week early. So they're actually like at campus for a week early in residence, like, around their family also comes, just to like, particularly for students who are coming from like quite far away, and also for them to like build their own community while they're there. And again, I'm only speaking for experience of my child, and my child like grew up in Toronto. He's lots of friends there, but building that other community was really important as well.
Yeah, 100%. Over the years, I've met so many amazing, probably your members, Indigenous businesses. And you touched on a little bit earlier about during the pandemic, some of those challenges that businesses faced. But what are some of those other barriers that you hear from some of your members, when they're, trying to push and grow their business in the economy?
I think, so definitely, as we said, access to capital and access to like both social and financial capital. I think too, for any entrepreneur, that's a very difficult, I've learned like definitely through this time and meeting with so many entrepreneurs, just how tough the road is really for a small business. And we definitely saw that through COVID, but even now it's also like we're providing supports, but we have to be really cognizant that if they're going to take time to learn or participate in one of our capacity building options, they're taking time away from their business. And for an entrepreneur, that's like what they have, like that's their most valuable resource is their time. So I think as we're trying to look at what supports we can build, so we've recently done some work on trade and trade policy. So the Trade Accelerator program that a lot of boards of trade offer, in how we can ensure that that meets the unique needs of Indigenous business. So from the perspective of trade for Indigenous to Indigenous businesses, but also from the perspective of the law and having like someone who really understands Indigenous law in that space. So how are we taking, not recreating the wheel, but taking some of the capacity building that is there for entrepreneurs and really ensuring that we're looking at how it affects and does it fully meet the needs of the uniqueness that Indigenous businesses have? And just making like tweaks to it. And that's been something that's really been helpful, because I think the world is changing so quickly and business world is changing so quickly. And how are we building that capacity for the hockey analogy of that? So like those businesses are ready, think about where the puck is going versus like being there. Kevin's going to like my hockey analogy.
Go Leafs.
So I think that's the other piece that we're seeing. If you're a large organization or if you're like an organization that's like really involved and has that network, you're more aware of what opportunities are coming. So if there's a large procurement opportunity that's coming, and if we're not getting that information out to businesses early enough so that they can prepare. So if we think about small modular reactors as an example, the requirements that a business needs to be able to work in nuclear are extensive. And we need to ensure that the businesses to get into the supply chain of small modular reactor have enough runway that they can get the capacity and the credentials that they need in order to become part of that supply chain. So OPG is a member, as is GE, and 3 years ago, we had a webinar with Indigenous businesses who might be able to become part of the supply chain for small modular reactors to talk about this is what it means, these are the credentials that are needed, and OPG is working with them through partnerships, through some First Nation partnerships, to build that capacity so when the supply chain is ready to purchase, that we have Indigenous businesses that can respond. So I think it's about that, like, how are the barrier of just not knowing what's coming, and we can all, play a part to remove that.
Yeah, 100%. And the journey of reconciliation, it's not, it doesn't mean that there won't be conflicts along the way, right? What it does mean that an organization will have capacity to address conflicts in a less harmful way, I'd say, with a greater potential for mutually beneficial outcomes, if you will. But what is your perspective, because you just touched on the kind of energy industry, but what's your perspective on that evolving relationship between Canadian-based natural resource organizations and Indigenous communities? Has there been progress there? Has it gotten the attention it's required?
So I mean, I'm a bit of an optimist, I think, or I wouldn't continue to be in this role. I think there are a lot more stories of success and stories of good relationships than there are none. I think the media likes to tell the stories that don't work because it's more sensational. But we are seeing a lot of incredible projects and partnerships. Enbridge is a prime example. But we're also seeing the capacity that's there to help enable the community to be a partner. So in Alberta, through the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, that, and the more recently announced federal loan guarantee, so that communities are enabled to be active and equity partners. And I think we're also seeing a lot of the relationships that are being built long before the project is there. And we're definitely seeing that here in the province of Ontario with Hydro One. I mean, Hydro One's commitment to ensure that on large projects, communities are 50% equity owners. I
was there for that announcement.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
That's like that's a leading announcement. And they're not just saying like 50% equity owners, but now Hydro One's also like, okay, but if they don't have the capacity to buy in, how do we support them on finding that financial capacity also. We're seeing a lot of like infrastructure builds that have equity partnerships. It's not to say that things aren't, there still aren't a ways to go for sure. But I think from what we're seeing, corporations and in all sectors are really waking up to understand like we're not going to be able to progress in this country unless we partner with First Nation communities, and particularly in infrastructure builds. And I think it's, in some ways, in most cases, it's corporations like really understanding that this is the right thing to do. But in a lot of situations, it's also corporations understanding we are not going to build this project or make progress unless we really look at reconciliation and make true partnerships. And we definitely see that more success when the relationships are being built, as I said, before the project is there. And you see that in the Watanakineap project in Northern Ontario. That project has been led and pushed by community and community leaders, and they've had different partners along the way, but you have 21 communities in Ontario owning and operating that transmission line. It hasn't been a short road for Margaret and the leadership of that organization, but the impact that transmission line has had on the communities and will have on the communities is incredible. And that's really through like they've actually had different corporate partners along the way, like come in, support the program, and then exit and come to another one. So I think there's a lot of success and we're seeing progress.
Yeah, I'm seeing more and more partnerships announced, particularly during my time at the chamber, and that has impact on the local communities where they can not be afraid to ask questions, right? Because those partnerships are already happening, so it has a ripple effect broader than just the partnership itself, for sure. So I like this question. If the Premier of Ontario or Prime Minister of Canada were sitting here today with us, what would you identify as the number one priority issue for Indigenous businesses?
I think our members would say access to capital, for sure. Either like just access to capital to scale up also, not even just that initial investment for them to start a business, but there's this real gap in when you have a business and then you want to scale, but you want to stay majority owned Indigenous and majority controlled Indigenous. So how do you find investors that are Indigenous, or how do you find access to reasonable interest capital to be able to scale up? So that's definitely, one of the, I would say many businesses would say would be the biggest priority. Others would say procurement, like the government of Canada is the largest sole purchaser in the country, so if they should be ensuring that their procurement numbers are much higher than many of the corporations, which today they're not, and same for the province of Ontario.
Procurement is one of the key ways you can give a business a leg up and create that opportunity.
For sure. And as I said, it's not additional
money. My favorite
money.
Policy files in the chamber.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how fun I am on a Friday night. Let's talk about procurement.
Riveting. It's riveting.
But if you ever want to nerd out, I'm here.
And I think it's also I'm not a politician, but it's a solution to health outcomes and employment outcomes and education outcomes. And it's not extra tax dollars either. It's look at where you're spending your money and direct that money that can have ripple effect outcomes in communities. And on the Watanakineap project, so before I came to CCAB, I was at the Independent Electricity System Operator, and Watanakineap project was a project that I was very close to, and I'm so proud to continue to watch it move. But one thing that we really looked at there was also the social outcomes when we were trying to work with government,
100%.
Both governments, on why should you be supporting this project. We often get, well, it's First Nation land, so it's federal land, so it's not the responsibility of the province of Ontario. But when we go back to the social outcomes that happen, at that time, actually, we were a Liberal government. Premier Wynne said, we will match whatever the federal government says. It was us convincing the federal government why it was important for them to support. But the social outcome conversation became very important in that conversation, and I think procurement is very similar. If I had the Premier or the Prime Minister here, I would say our biggest priority is we need to be at the table when policy is being created, because way too often Indigenous businesses are an afterthought. We're not like involved in the policy creation. We're not prioritized in the policy creation. So currently in the federal government, there's a women entrepreneurship strategy, a Black entrepreneurship strategy, a 2S LGBTQ plus entrepreneurship strategy, all out of innovation, science, and economic development, out of the small business branch in ISED, which makes sense for an entrepreneurship strategy. All Indigenous entrepreneurship is out of Indigenous Services Canada, which is a ministry that was created to be dissolved eventually. And I continue to push for a government-wide Indigenous entrepreneurship strategy that's supported across all ministries. So when our members are going to M&R or ISED, they're not like, the ministers and staff aren't saying, well, we'll go check with ISK and see if ISK is funding this in some way. Like, it's a business conversation. And now I'm ranting, but
I'm here for good.
so much of what ISK is saying is like settlements, which are so important, and clean water, which is a human right, and broadband, which is also a human right. That's not business. That's not moving us to prosperity. That's getting us to like an equal level where we should be and should have been long before. So bring them on. I'm happy to have the conversation. If you can get them here, I'll be back.
Prime Minister, you're invited
Yeah.
to our networking event that we're doing, right, Ian? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about. So you've worked with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. You're an association yourself at CCAB. Let's talk about that. You touched on it earlier, but like the importance of business organizations like the KW Chamber for advancing the interests of small business at all levels of government.
Yeah. So I'll say first, like conversations like this, thank you for the invitation. I know it took a while for us to get it in our calendars. But I think conversations like this, just to have that conversation and to bring exposure to what the Indigenous economy is like and the opportunities for working with Indigenous business are so important. But I think there's also, and we've really found in partnership, so also when I first took on the role, Perrin Beatty reached out and said, and Goldie Hyder at Business Council of Canada, and Diane at Retail Council of Canada, and Dan at CFIB. And we started having these Friday calls, the six of us, saying, like, what are your members saying? Like, what are you saying? And us coming together and asking for things together, as we all know, like, was a much louder voice to government.
Oh, 100%.
And that partnership, like, including, like, I am forever grateful to them to immediately include this new CEO at CCAB in those conversations. And sometimes it was, speaking about Friday evenings, it was always Friday evenings. And sometimes it was just us, like, complaining to each other. Yes, it was therapy sessions.
And you actually, if you don't mind me interrupting, but for folks in the room, I don't know if no one likes to think of government as super innovative. It's a big machine. But what I saw during the pandemic, both provincially and federally, because, we all were there, the world kind of cracked open, and then we went home. And people were like, what the heck? Like, what are we going to do? Like, where's the playbook for this one? And we're like, there's no playbook. So, I think the feds met with stakeholder groups daily, like ours, in small businesses, big businesses, and provincially, I think they did it weekly, but they were taking feedback and implementing it at a lightning pace, and they're just not. There's checks and measures, and if there's anyone that works in compliance, you can appreciate that, us people that are in advocacy, we're like, kind of, let's go, right? But there are checks and measures in government for very good reasons, but it showed like the ability to be agility, or agility, I'm like, I need another coffee, to be like that government could be agile and super responsive, and that listening even to organizations like ours definitely helped when we were partnering up, but it was so. I'd never seen anything like that. And they didn't have a playbook either, so I felt really bad for the public policy makers, right? But
yeah. But I think that like our voices together and like leaning on one another has been so helpful, and same with Ontario Chamber. And I mean, even my position on the board, I have learned so much from that I've been able to like transfer back to our organization. And OCC has learned the same
Sharing is
way.
caring.
And,
Yep.
you know, we're both deliverers of the CDAP program as well. There's things that we both agreed needed to be changed on CDAP, but when we went together to government to ask for those things to be changed, we had much more traction. So I think there's so many commonalities between the work that we do at CCAB and chambers and business councils across the country that there's a lot that we can do by like sharing our research and knowledge and data, but also then like going together when we're asking for things.
Yeah, that's great. We're going to completely shift and talk about the application of, like, why the application of technology. You touched on broadband, but I think this is broader than that, broader than the broadband poetry. But why is that particularly important for Indigenous businesses and communities?
So definitely broadband. We're talking a lot about COVID. I thought it was over.
I know but it's like a little bit of a throwback, right?
Yeah, definitely when we saw this switch to e-commerce on during COVID, like shopping and delivery of services and products, and that, you know, for any business has been like incredibly important, and supporting entrepreneurs through that process has been very important. But one thing that we're talking a lot about right now with respect to technology and AI is also about intellectual property and traditional knowledge, and how do those things work together, particularly in a community. Like traditional knowledge is so valuable in a community, and also so valuable to resource projects. And, you know, when you really have those partnerships and communities are able to really share, like this line can't root this way because there are traditional medicines here, or this is what traditional medicine looks like, you need to avoid this. There's ways that we can adopt technology to be able to share those stories, as you know, our elders as we lose our elders, and to pass down those stories. So there's an Indigenous business in Thunder Bay called Origin. They're a member. They've developed this VR technology where they will actually, they've actually gone out with elders to where there's infrastructure being built, and elders have identified, as an example, like what the traditional medicines are and what things to be avoided. And then they have their tree clearing people or vegetation clearing people actually watch on a VR system so that they understand, and it's almost like they're walking with the elder, so that they can. It's so cool, and it's such an incredible like adaptation of technology for us to be able to share those stories. There's another.
They can do a demo at Ian's upcoming networking event.
There's it's Melissa Hardy-Giles, who used to be on OCC's board. There's another business who works with tobacco and medicines, and actually delivers them. And you know, in many Indigenous culture, we're very careful about who handles the traditional medicine, and that you're handling them in a good way, and you're handling them only at certain times. And they've said, and not everyone might agree with this, but they've said that the introduction of technology, so having machines like handle that, avoids having to ensure that you don't have an individual who shouldn't be handling the medicines outside of protocol handling them, because you don't have a manufacturing room of people, men or potentially women on their moon, that shouldn't be handling the medicines if you're able to adopt and adapt technology in that way.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting. Well, okay, we're just about at time, but I do, before we wrap up, I did want to ask you a question. And this is mentorship's a topic near and dear to my heart, but who are some of those mentors that have been so important across your career? Because you've had an incredible career. You're making an enormous impact. Your team's, it's always been an honor to work with your team because they're incredible. So, yeah.
My team inspires me every day. I've never met a group of people so dedicated to the work that we do. Like, it's amazing, and at times I have to pull them back because working at a not-for-profit is so different than, and I haven't always worked at a not-for-profit.
So different.
And when I moved to CCAB, I was really like, oh, this is, and I'm very high EI scale person. It's a lot of highly emotionally intelligent people who are incredibly dedicated to the work that they're doing and so much emotion and will do it for little. So really protective of the team in that way. And, they are inspire me every day.
They run.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
run, they move.
they really do.
Yeah.
But mentors, I would say my sister. So my oldest sister is a graduate of Waterloo. She worked in the nuclear sector at Bruce Power for her whole career. So, a very male-dominated sector for sure, and a position. She was a nuclear operator. So as an engineer, her and I often supported, mentored each other in those spaces when I was also in, one of the only women at the table many times. So she has 2 boys, I have 2 boys. Now she's retired and in this space. So we definitely, I would say she's quite a bit older than me. No. I say we mentor one another. Now, we're at that point. When I was little, she was my mentor. But, and then I've, JP Gladue, who was my predecessor at CCAB and really encouraged me into this role, I will tell you that when he said that he was thinking of moving on, my initial reaction was, I am not ready. I think I actually put my head down on his desk and said, I'm not ready. I had only been at CCAB as the COO for a year and a bit, I think. And he was like, you're so ready. You're ready in different areas. We're different leaders, but he was like, you're ready in different ways that I'm never going to be. And to me, that's something that people need. You need that person to say, you totally got this. And then, there's 2 women, Indigenous business women that I've met since I moved into this role who continue to really inspire me, and we lift each other up. And Victoria Lebola, who owns a construction company in Listuguj, and Dr. Marie Delorme, who's an incredible woman who actually used to be on the board of CCAB long before I got there. Both of them have been really just strong people for me in this position.
That's amazing, and I feel equally as lucky. Rocco Rossi, who's the head of the Ontario Chamber, and now Dan Hitch, both incredible leaders, and then Duncan Hane at OLG's an incredible leader, and really for that journey of economic or the journey of reconciliation, you really need that leadership at the top. And just observing, he's just been an incredible leader. And for me, it's just, I can learn so much from that. And I think that's so important to have someone that you can turn to or observe and learn new things in terms of leadership style or drive and all that. So also, if anyone from LG is watching, is that the camera? That's the camera, right? Yeah. I keep looking there when I think I'm looking at the camera anyway. But super proud of the corporate affairs team and the whole team at LG. Listen, Tabatha, thank you very much for today's discussion. It was really special to share this stage with you today for these important topics to talk about, so that you folks in the crowd here can feel comfortable asking any questions to start their own journeys. And again, big thanks to the KW Chamber and the whole team and Ian. This is an incredible event. Thanks again, Tabatha.
Yes.
Over to you, Ian.
Miigwech.
Listen, that was amazing. Two amazing leaders. Thank you so much. I've heard great things, and you delivered, Tabatha. Thanks so much for making the way down here to join us today, and to my good friend Michelle for walking us through this discussion. What I take away is the journey starts with small steps, and every small business has a role to play. Certainly, government and government procurement and taking away the systemic barriers is incredibly important, because we have big needs here in Canada for infrastructure, for resource extraction, doing it sustainably, environmentally, but none of it's going to happen without reconciliation with Indigenous groups, and so it's incredibly important for all of our communities. So just before we end off, I want to once again thank our incredible sponsors. Thanks once again to our title sponsor, TD Women in Enterprise and TD Indigenous Banking. Gold sponsor, EY. Our bronze sponsor, Enbridge Gas and RBC Royal Bank. And to our door prize sponsor, OLG. As we conclude, I wanted to invite Tim Rollins. He's the Waterloo Regional Office Managing Partner and Tax Account Leader in Technology, AM&M. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure it's something tax related, with EY to the stage to say a few closing remarks. Tim. Must be. Mergers and acquisitions, members. Later, you can school me up. Thanks.
All right, Tabatha, Michelle, thank you, and for helping us learn more about the journey of truth and reconciliation. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Rollins. I'm the EY Waterloo Office Managing Partner, and I'm honored to be here today, along with some members of my team in our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, as well as Lindsay Swanson, who's a driving force across Canada on our diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, and a true supporter of Aboriginal affairs and how our journey is progressing across the country. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. Just a few short months ago, a number of my EY colleagues were extremely excited to be in Vancouver, with Tabatha and the whole CCAB team receiving our silver level certification of CCAB's Progressive Aboriginal Relationships, or PAR program. Tabatha, since then, EY has been motivated more than ever to develop our reconciliation action plan and put into action many insightful recommendations that we have received through Indigenous-led consultations. A big thank you to you and your entire team for everything you've done to support EY on its truth and reconciliation journey. And I was really happy when I woke up this morning and read an email in my inbox from our people leader across the country speaking about the journey we're on and the progress we've made. Many of you know that EY is passionate about supporting entrepreneurs, from our 30-year running Entrepreneur of the Year program to our Supplier Diversity program. We're passionate about supporting the growth of all entrepreneurs. Working with the CCAB has been critical for EY's Canada to identify and deliver the growth opportunities, resources, and programming that best supports Indigenous-led business. Each year, EY has had the incredible opportunity and privilege to work directly with the CCAB team to deliver a pitch competition where 12 Indigenous leaders and business owners have the opportunity to hone their business pitch and compete for a grand prize. What's wonderful about this pitch competition is not just the prize. It's the opportunity to engage in directly with these inspiring business leaders, to get to know them, to understand them, and to understand what drives their entrepreneurial spirit, to understand what inspires them, and to understand what obstacles they face. These are the relationships where growth begins: connecting, making introductions, opening and sharing networks. This is the opportunity we have had in working with the CCAB and the CCAB certified business. We are grateful. Our Indigenous relations and relationships we have built is an incredible source of pride. I ask everyone who is here today to consider how you can rise to the challenge, drive understanding, acceptance, and prosperity for our Indigenous neighbors. One person, one community, one relationship at a time. Tabatha, thank you again for everything you and the CCAB do to help our organizations like ours connect with Indigenous business and communities. You are helping us build a better working world. Thank you.
Listen, just as we draw to a close, thanks once again to Michelle and Tabatha. As Tim put the clarion call, there's lots of work to do, and it starts today. Michelle's team, she came not only with herself and to moderate, but she brought a gift basket with her from OLG, and we have randomly drawn one lucky winner to receive this. It's here. Lisa Grogan, Overlap Associates, come on up. I think this is it right here.
Put it together myself.
Listen, and finally, thanks so much for joining us today. To all of you, your continued support of the Chamber, its events, and our programs is essential to the success and the growth of our community, not only in business, but in civic society and all of the things that make our community such an incredible place to live and work and do business. If you're looking for more networking events, the Chamber has a full calendar of upcoming events on our website at greaterkwchamber.com. Thanks once again for attending today's event. We do hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Awesome.